May I just, to begin with, thank you very much, all of you, for sparing the time from your precious time and schedule, busy schedules, and coming to debate such an important issue with us. You will forgive me that, to begin with, for the purpose of broadcast, and some of them are live, so I'm going to speak for the first 5-10 minutes in Kurdish, then switch to English. And we'll have a proper introductions, and I'll ask everybody, whoever start talking, to present themselves or introduce themselves properly. But I simply wanted to initially say what a fine bunch of people around this table, stakeholders, people who are interested in this topic, and I'll come to that in a minute. I have with me stakeholders, people who actually contributed significantly to this study, and I'll come to the order of our presentation. But I'm going to spend, first of all, the first 5-6 minutes in telling you in a nutshell what the study found. This study was sponsored by NWO, the Dutch organization for granting funds, and beyond them, it was funded by the Foreign Ministry of the Netherlands, and it was carried out in collaboration with the JCCC, which is a joint committee for coordination in the government of KRG, and with Consul, this Swedish sponsored organization that is active among IDPs and refugees and carries out studies, and Barbara Risk is going to speak a little bit about the IOM's point of view and any trends and data that you might present. And I forgot to mention that Mr. Palani, Cameron Palani, will talk about actual figures. In a nutshell, what we found was that after surveying well over 500 people and interviewing over 30 IDPs and with in-depth analysis, we found that of those internally displaced people who came to the Kurdistan region, when we met them in Duhok, Suleimani, and Erbil, we found that just over half of them, 55% of them, had actually thought about moving on and immigrating or migrating abroad, and mostly to Europe. Of those 55%, a quarter had already concrete plans to move on, and those plans were formulated after they were displaced, in most cases. So a lot of people had plans, but the majority, maybe 2/3 of them, were seriously thinking about migration after they were displaced and arrived. Among the people who had those plans, interestingly, they were spread across the ages, but those who are between 25 and 36 were the majority, or the peak was in that age group. And again, across the educational levels, people were thinking about migrating, but those who had lower level of education were more enthusiastic for going abroad. And you might ask, what leads these people to leave? Uncertainties about the future, their pessimism about the future of the political, security, and economic circumstances in Iraq are actually among the main drivers. And those who had friends and relatives abroad were more likely to have concrete plans and more determined to go. Interestingly, relations between the IDPs and the host community, that's the socio-political and socio-economic reasons, were not really significant. People didn't leave because of those reasons, so that the uncertainty about the future of Iraq was more of a reason. And these, the populations, those who wanted to migrate, they're actually nicely spread or equally spread across the components, whether they are Sunnis, Kurds, or minorities. But Yazidis and Christians were among the top, or disproportionately distributed in a way that more of them wanting to go with greater determination compared to the rest. So at the end, in this report, you will find that we came up with recommendations to mainly the Iraqi government, who should lead a process and develop a framework, a policy that would provide reassurance to the IDPs and to those people who are planning to go abroad. And it doesn't actually help by just saying, have a policy, think about it, or have a framework. Real action is what will reassure people, real steps, real roadmap. And this issue of reassuring people has to be integrated within the reconstruction programs that are now taking priority across the previously occupied territories. Coordination between stakeholders are among the obvious ones, but what is clear is that the longer this lasts, the worse it can get for stability in Iraq. And finally, this is a diverse, multifactorial phenomenon. You can't tackle it by only one thing and in a piecemeal manner. And importantly, you cannot see this as a short-term problem. This is a chronic, long-term issue that we need to have policies that are incorporating those factors into account, and that is by having a long-term policy given the instabilities that are predicted. So I'm going to stop here, and I'd like to invite, by the way, people around this table are, I would say 90% of them are experts, and they already know a lot about these issues and have good reason to be interested. So I'm not going to assume that we are teaching you basics, and it is actually also worth knowing who's who, but I will leave that to the question and answer session where people can introduce themselves as they go along. But I wanted to know what Janet, as our Consul General for the Netherlands, her reflection on this study and the whole phenomenon.
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to see the results of a study that we've financed. You know, you just said that everyone is experts, 90% around the table. I don't always consider myself, being a diplomat, as an expert on this particular issue. This is why we have instruments like organizations in the Netherlands who have the expertise, skills available and instruments available, so they come up with research papers which are for us always very, very useful. I think the recommendations that were put in the report, definitely recommendations that we will look into fit, and I would also very much like to take the opportunity to discuss with the GCC and also the central government in Baghdad to see how we can deal with these recommendations, which I believe are very important recommendations. For us, the report comes at a very crucial time, I think, not only for Iraq as a country that is facing a new phase in its history, more or less to say, but it's also a crucial report now with policy recommendations for the European Union that just published its own new strategy for Iraq, but it's also a timely report for my own government that has, which is a new government that has put Iraq in its priority countries to work in for the coming years to come. And actually these issues, the displacement patterns and the emigration patterns and the trends, are issues that are of our concern. And of course the European Union, like you already said, there is a pattern of emigration, and Europe, I think in 2016, of the people that entered into the European Union, the fourth on the list were people coming from this region or from Iraq, but a lot of them also from the Kurdistan region. So putting everything together, combining everything, for us the report, I think, is like I said, it's a timely report. I think what you just said, that this, to tackle really this problem, which is a chronic problem for Iraq and has been a chronic problem for some times, you need to look into the challenges from a comprehensive framework. And what I really liked about the report, and I've read it really from A to Z, is that it doesn't only focus on what we normally see, on the poverty and the lack of jobs and education skills, but it also really puts down its finger on a sensitive issue. And I think that is the fact that there's not really been yet, or has not been updated, the national policy for displacements. And I think with the Kuwait conference that's behind us just right now, and discussions going on, I think it's really right for us now to discuss how are we going to tackle the more political issues that are on the table, and how can we make actors in Baghdad and Erbil to come together and tackle the issues not only from a job, skills, education, return type of framework, but how can we actually address the instability that people feel, or the insecurity that people feel when they decide to move onwards. And of course, that is a shared challenge between the European Union and Iraq, because we don't really like to see large waves of people who feel uncertain in their country to come to the European Union. We would actually like, that people find the opportunities and the chances here in Iraq and the Kurdistan region to not move forward. So there's a common challenge here. There's a shared interest here to really focus on these issues. And I look forward to this discussion.
Actually, I'm going to directly give you some numbers, and actually, because we have got too many figures and numbers, I just give you the key important issues on numbers here. As you see here is distribution of actually our sample per identity. As you see, the main 5 components, and Sunni Arab, Kurd, Yazidi, Shabak, and Christians are found in Iraq as IDPs. And then we have got per shelter type, because it's very important. It is from the personal and economic indications. And that's a very important figure. The majority of those we actually, our respondents, slightly have decided to leave the country. What's more important is 80%, the majority of them haven't yet undertaken any concrete plan to leave the country. And more importantly is the majority of them decided to leave the country after displacement, not before the displacement or upon the arrival. And per shelter type, we haven't found a big difference between those in critical or private settings, but in the camp, they are, the majority of them want to actually leave the country. Here's the important issue is identity. Yazidis and Christians were significantly represented among those who planned and wished to leave the country. Country of destination is important, is Germany. And why? There is an important issue here. The majority of Christians want to actually move to Australia, while Yazidis prefer, or Germany is the most preferred destination for Yazidis. Here is the issue of community and the family and the links with friends and relatives there. And reasons is, as we said, I have family and relatives, friends there. Prioritize it abroad is being safe. The majority who want to leave the country is because they want to live in a safe and secure country. Future expectation, as what we found in the paper, is the most important driver of people's migration decision about over security, political, and economy in the time frame as we actually expressed it in the paper in the next 5 years. The majority of them have very pessimistic view about the future from these different sectors: security, political, and economy. Actually, we found that socio-economic or political drivers have impact haven't directly impacted the IDP's migration decision, but contributed to the prevailing condition of uncertainty. Here are the recommendations as Dr. Lauer has already expressed, it is the most important is consider displacement in Iraq as a chronic condition versus a sudden crisis, and then recognize how this displacement waves destabilize the region, particularly Iraq, and appreciate displacement as a diversified issue. And actually, we have more specific recommendations in the report, but here is the most important or the framework of our recommendations. And now I'm happy to open the discussion to the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura and Mary, for inviting us to participate in this meeting. Very important discussion. Maybe just to comment briefly on, maybe some highlight some of the key points that might be relevant for us to discuss. First of all, I think interesting to hear the preliminary findings of the research. It's not a surprise that these are quite similar to the findings that IOM found in the number of studies that we've done in the last few years in Iraq. We've done mainly studies amongst the migrants that are already in Europe, as well as migrants that have actually gone to Europe and returned, including through IOM's voluntary assistance program. So it's quite interesting to find, I would say, as an overall finding, what was consistent throughout the whole group was the category of no hope. A lot of the migrants, the reason why they wanted to leave Iraq was no hope. And that is a combination of, indeed, personal security, generalized security, a lack of perception of lack of social justice in Iraq, and then obviously the idea, the perception that in Europe there is better, and then the lack of economic opportunity. Also, perhaps to mention that as I said, we've been implementing the Assistance Voluntary Return Program for the last, since 2003 in Iraq. And in the last 2 years, we've had an enormous spike in the number of returns. Normally it was around 2,000 a year, 2,000, 3,000, and then the last 2 years it was, 2016 was 12,000, and in 2017 it was about 7,500 returnees. So this is also something to consider for the KRG, for the government of Iraq, that there's actually quite a number of people coming back, either spontaneously or through assistance through IOM or other organizations. And we need to, this is a really important point, is that a lot of these people who return, they actually are thinking about remigrating again, even though they've been unsuccessful, because there is this continuously sort of a lack of this uncertainty and lack of hope for the future. So, I can only concur very much with the recommendation to focus on stabilizing communities and investing in stabilization. I think also what is an important point to mention is that let's say the main objectives or the main recommendations for the returnees is the same as for the IDPs. It's about economic investment in social services and psychosocial. For a lot of the people, the psychosocial is just as important. A lot of the migrants that left for Europe, they feel a bit like a failure. So coming back empty-handed is not conducive. So I think as different organizations, government, international organizations, we need to work closely together to make sure that also the returnees feel welcome again back into Iraq. And it's about 50% KRI, 50% rest of the country. So it is all of us have to work together. I think these are some of the main points, and then Julie might discuss a bit more in detail some of the findings.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for Mary for inviting us. We are pleased we supported this research, because it's also for us it's important to know about the perceptions of the IDPs and what do they think for the future, whether they want to go back or to migrate. This is important. In our policy, we support only the voluntary return of the IDPs, and this has been clearly communicated to our colleagues and our partners in Baghdad. We don't want to force any IDPs to go back. This is one. And second one, we do believe that there's an immediate need, not now actually, even before, we were advocating to have a comprehensive, policy paper to be inclusive all of the sectors, so to addressing this chronic problem of displacement in Iraq. And this is not something new. And it's not only as a consequences of the ISIS. If you look at after 2005 and 2010, we in the KRG received over 800,000 people. Majority of them were minorities, Christians and fairly Kurds, and also the Sunnis. And among this number, around 15% stayed in the KRG. The rest, majority returned to their homes, and a few number of them migrated to Europe and the West. So, and after, the ISIS, we've seen, waves, big waves of displacement again, and a huge number of them have returned, but still the return is not sustainable. And those who have been able, they already decided and they went back to their homes and or place of origin. But those who remained, and they are the one who are vulnerable, and they do need attention and help to go back. A majority of them, half of them, it's around over 30% still living in the Kurdistan region. And if you look at it, the consequence or the displacement itself is not a consequence. It's a consequence, it's not the root cause. The root cause, if you think ISIS is militarily defeated, and then everything is stabilized, normalized, I think it's a wrong assessment, a wrong perception. The root causes that has, led to the emergence of ISIS are still there. The political grievances, the economic grievances, the social problems across the areas and the services and also jobs, security and protection still are a key priorities and a problem across the liberated areas and also in other cities. And if you look at it, the liberated areas, especially after 16th October last year, the offensive is launched by PMU, Shia militias and Iraqi forces that also led to the instability and destabilized the areas which already stabilized under the Peshmerga forces, and so led to the displacement of 200,000 more people, and from Hurma to Kirkuk and to Mahmud and Ninawa Plain. One problem here is, are those who have returned or those who have already returned is sustainable or not? And this, just last week, we have received in Mosul 172 over 854 people fled Mosul again. And when asking them why you are coming, well, what's the reason? The first one, they are clearly saying, the threat from militia and armed groups. And the second one, they don't trust those who are providing security and protection. And then it comes to the lack of services and also the livelihood, support jobs. There's no jobs and services supporting them. Therefore, we have been advocating for having a national policy focusing all of these root causes so we can have a sustainable and return supporting all of the IDPs. And we have already discussed with all of our partners and also with the Baghdad. And Baghdad, doesn't refuse having a national policy. When it comes to developing and having it, implementing it, now this is the problem. We need to develop and actions to be taken. And if you look at it, regarding the steps have been taken, we don't see it. And this crisis is cannot be overcome or ended only with military success, overestimating the military success. Therefore, it needs a comprehensive national policy. It will help also, to stop or to prevent future conflict, cycles of conflict across the country. Because the longer these IDPs will be staying, their properties will face a systematic occupation, demographic change. And we have been suffering in Iraq from demographic change since the establishment of the country at the hands of the former regimes. And now either it's a policy, systematic, or naturally now is happening. Therefore, it will only pave the way for another cycle of conflict, which no one will be a winner. Everybody will be losing if we come up with another insurgency across the country. Therefore, in 2015, we signed an MOU. One of the articles is developing a national policy for the return with Baghdad. But until today, to be honest, nothing has happened. And last year we had another, meeting in Baghdad. There was initiative from UN Habitat, also IOM was involved, and UNHCR to have a policy, a clear mechanism, processes supporting the return. Then we agreed in the meeting to combining all of these three plans into one mechanism. And after that, we haven't heard anything, about what happened to these three documents. May other partners comment on this. Therefore, with the current natural or believing the naturally people will go back, this phase is not sustainable. And second, it will only pave the way for another conflict because the root causes which led to this displacement crisis are still there, and they are purely not only economic problems. It's also, and the first one is political problems, which led to the sectarian conflict, and then we come up with the destruction of 1/3 of the country, displacement, and especially after ISIS, if you look at it, what happened, it's completely different and incomparable to the time between 2005 to 2011. Thousands of people killed, and thousands of people, 100,000, joined ISIS, and they committed horrible crimes against civilians, against security forces and Kashmiri forces, Iraqi, army, civilians, and thousands of youths have been brainwashed or indoctrinated, by ISIS. So, and thousands of families next door, neighbors, committed crime against the other one. Therefore, the situation is very, very difficult. And then, if you look at the destruction, hundreds, thousands of houses just destroyed simply, and people, they don't have, the financial resources just to rebuild it. And if you look at, Baghdad, the budget for 2018, the drafted, no money is allocated, to support the reconstruction. It's entirely depending on the international community. And the Kuwait conference you mentioned is not as promising as were planned for. And then we are not very, optimistic, any solution will be found, in the near future. But there's an urgent and immediate need for the genuine national reconciliation, covering all of the key political problems and meeting and solving the grievances of the people. This should be the priority number one, and this should be led by Baghdad, because all of the authorities and solutions are lying in Baghdad, not in Erbil. The authority, power sharing, the fair distribution of national, international resource distribution, and political, decentralization of giving authority and fiscal decentralization. This is all lie in Baghdad. And the recommendations, I have read it before, and they are very, very good and very realistic. So, but it needs also international support, to condition, Baghdad to come forward and then providing support, not just providing support, but also putting some, conditions to have a plan, then supporting it. Thank you.